do. It's my pleasure to introduce the first of our four speakers here in the symposium. One of the titans, I think, of the United Kingdom megagame scene, certainly. Becky Ladley is one of the most formidable and creative players and opponents that I've ever come across in megagaming, and her political savvy and her ability to shape a game's discourse to suit her character's objectives are, I think, legendary at this point. She is the designer of the equally legendary game Everybody Dies, a title which consistently features in the top 3 best megagame lists of anyone who has had the pleasure of playing it. And last year, she followed up this success with the refreshingly original Trope High, a game which I think we're going to be hearing a little bit more about later on today. The game of supernatural high school shenanigans, which is how I describe it. Becky may disagree, but not certainly how I do it. She is the chair of our friends and neighbours to the south, the Pennine Megagames. And I would certainly encourage you, those of you who, and I'm sure most people here already have, but if you haven't joined their Facebook community, I would strongly suggest that you do. And keeping an eye on their calendar is always a good idea for excellent opportunities in megagaming. She is also the voice behind the popular Becky blogs, where you can find regular articles and analysis covering every facet of megagaming. Now, her paper today is entitled Megagaming in 2030. And I am excited to hear her perspective on our hobby's future. Becky, over to you.
Thanks very much, Seamus. So, megagames in 2030. Well, how many megagames were run 10 years ago in 2010? Would anyone like to guess in the chat? We're seeing 4, 8, 5, 10, 1... So it was actually 3. It was War in the West, Of Gods and Men, and Come One and Earl. So looking at the first 2 months of 2020, so just January and February, we had 13 games take place. So looking at 2030, where will we be? In terms of the number of games, the types of games, and will the definition of a megagame change? Don't worry, I won't be defining megagames today. So at the start of 2020, COVID has had a massive impact on our community. It's pretty much stopped in-game megagames. In-person megagames, sorry. But we're quite lucky to have a lot of fast thinkers in our community. And in just the few weeks that just the first few weeks of COVID affecting us, we had some online games already starting to be designed and run. And we know COVID isn't going to be going away anytime soon. It could be affecting us for a year, 18 months, even several years. But as lockdown starts to ease, I think designers are again going to rise to that challenge and create socially distanced megagames. How would we as designers approach a socially distanced megagame? Most of our current megagames won't work for that, but maybe a wide area megagame that takes place across a single building, but with 5 players each in 10 rooms. Challenges like these force us to consider new ways of approaching things that we've always done in a certain way. We don't know what challenges we're going to face in the next 10 years. So there are some things about how megagames will look in 2030 that we can't predict at this point. So I'm not going to spend time worrying about what that would be like. There are some things we can predict. And I'm going to look at 3 of them today. I think we're going to have the broadening of the definition of megagames. We're going to see an impact of technology, and we're going to see the continued growth of the community. So the first one, looking at the definition of a megagame. Whatever your definition is of a megagame, whatever you subscribe to, it's a broad definition, isn't it? And by 2030, I think that's going to be even broader, and there are a few reasons for that. The first thing I'd like to consider is something that I call generations of megagame designers. And these are three fairly broad categories, and there's going to be a lot of people who fall into multiple ones or people who don't fall into any of them, but three broad generations at the moment. We've got Gen 1. These are our original founders, the Megagame makers who have been running games since 1980. They have decades of experience running these sort of games, and the sort of games that they create come quite strongly from a lot of them having a war game background. Then we've got Gen 2 designers. These are people who have attended a Gen 1 Megagame. They joined the hobby since around 2014 when Shut Up and Sit Down videoed Watch the Skies, and that took off. And these Gen 2 designers take the original Megagame format and change it in some way. You might think of it as a bit of a misunderstanding, air quotes. Not a bad misunderstanding, but say all along Megagames were considered to be done in a certain way, and these Gen 2 designers, they misunderstood something and did it a bit differently. Now you've got Gen 3 Megagamers as well. These are people who've never attended a Megagame, or at least not a Gen 1 game, but they're designing a game anyway. Maybe they're in another country or a different part of this country that they can't get to a game easily. These people have even more of an, air quote, misunderstanding. It's like Chinese whispers. Like, the designs are not necessarily worse or better than the Gen 1 and the Gen 2 games. They're just different. And by 2030, I think we're going to see all these games continue to be played. Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3 games, designed by all three generations, being played alongside each other. We'll have games similar to those run in 1980, similar to those run now, and some that are completely different to what we've got at the moment. The second reason why I think that the definition of megagame is going to broaden is because our player base is going to continue to diversify. I think it's fair to say that in 2010, the megagaming community was predominantly British, predominantly white, predominantly male, and a lot of them came from a wargaming background. As I mentioned, the majority of these are our Gen 1 designers. Then in 2014, Shut Up and Sit Down brought a massive influx of board gamers to the hobby. And since then, people have joined from role-play backgrounds, from LARP, even from non-gaming backgrounds, like theatre, immersive theatre, Model UN, and even people who've never played games before. Well, maybe Monopoly with the family at Christmas, but not that people who consider themselves non-gamers have come along. These people coming, who've got different ages, different genders, who come from different countries, different nationalities and cultures, and different gaming backgrounds, these will all have different perspectives on what's an interesting setting to play, what makes a role cool, what is a fun thing to do. This is easiest to see with gaming background, but it does apply to any of them. But for example, if you asked a wargamer and a LARPer to design a science game, you would end up with two completely different designs. So as our community diversifies and the designers we have diversified, the games are naturally going to diversify, but they'll all fit under the broad megagame umbrella. Another thing that will affect megagames diversifying is the commercialization of the hobby. Over the past 10 years, the majority of games have been hobbyist games. One or two people have had some level of income coming from megagames, but they're very much the exception to the rule. But over the next 10 years, this is going to increase. It's been increasing so far. It will continue to increase. There are challenges involved in commercializing, though. The profit margins in megagames are very small. It's a huge amount of effort and time and energy that goes into creating a megagame. A lot of megagames are created as one-shots with secret plots and surprise elements. They rely quite heavily on the control team, which is made up of unpaid volunteers. And there are benefits to keeping a competitive price point for new players to encourage them into the hobby, and also to lower the amount of pre-game reading, considering it's already a large time commitment to get people to come along. So games that would work well for commercialization would look quite different to current games, and designers designing for a commercial aspect would have to design different games, make changes. They would have to make games shorter or bigger with more roles. They might need to simplify the rules so that they can be picked up easier on the day, so it requires less pre-game briefing. Games may need to be more repeatable, and this could lead to less detailed briefings. Overall, it could lead to the simplification of megagames for this area of the hobby. But these people have set out to create a commercial megagame, so they would still be calling them megagames. Would the designers who have created these real labour of love designs, would they consider them to be mega games? We know that these arguments are already happening in the community, but the fact of the matter is that these people would be selling them as commercial mega games. They would be selling them as mega games. So the people who come along to those games would end up part of our community. There are, of course, positives that come with commercialising mega games. Things like a better build quality, improved game components, increased playtesting, compensation for control. A lot of these would be good for the community, but it would mean that the commercial mega games would inevitably be shorter, bigger, more repeatable, some combination of these. For these reasons, I think that the definition of mega games is going to broaden by 2030 because of the increased number of Gen 3 designers, because of the diversifying player base, and because of the introduction of simplified commercial games. The definition is going to broaden. So coming on to my second factor that I think is going to play a big part over the next 10 years, technology. I know a lot of experienced players out there already think that including technology at a mega game is a risk. But as technology becomes more intuitive, more accessible, easier to use and design with, it is going to get more common at games. We're already seeing WhatsApp being used at mega games for players and control to keep in touch with each other. Another example is the way that press games has evolved. When I first started, you got sat down with a laptop and a printer and you produced print newspapers. Prior to that, it was headlines on flipboards. More recently, when Twitter became big, Twitter was how press was done. And nowadays, you've got everything from websites to audio announcements, or even press reporters being filmed in the back room and broadcast to the room as a whole, as well as the other forms of press game that we had in earlier times, the print and the headlines. As we change how we consume press in real life, I feel like press is going to mirror that at games in terms of the technology we use. Other forms of technology that we could well see at mega games, and I'll explain why in a minute why we're not really seeing that at the moment, are things like QR codes, NFC, so that's near field communication where you would tap your phone on, say, a station at a mega game to interact with a mechanic, augmented reality, virtual reality, apps. These are used in a small number of games at the moment, but there's a bit of apprehension about asking players to telling players that they need to have a smartphone in order to attend a mega game. Smartphones are pretty common now, but over the next 10 years, they're going to be more and more ubiquitous until it gets to the point that we just assume that people attending a mega game will bring their smartphone along. We might need to provide charging points if we do that, though. Another factor that affects how much technology is used at games is the fact that in the world as a whole, a relatively small number of people can, say, design an app. And the mega game community is still quite small, so the overlap's small. Chances are, if someone involved in your mega game can design an app, your mega game got an app. And as the community gets bigger, we'll get more people in with these technical skills, so the games are going to become more technical and the community as a whole. Finally, growth. I think over the next 10 years, mega games are going to continue to grow, coming from 3 mega games in 2010 to 13 mega games in just the first 2 months of this year. In 2030, how many could we see? We might stop counting. There might be so many taking place in private groups, in university clubs, behind closed doors, that we don't even try to track them all in one place. Like with LARP, I don't think there's a big list somewhere with every single LARP taking place. I hope that's where the community is going, enormous growth. But it's not a guarantee, and there are a few challenges that mean that it might not grow that way. The first one is the potential for knowledge loss. The majority of the knowledge that we have in mega-gaming at the moment resides in the designers I described as Gen 1 and Gen 2 designers. The Gen 1 designers have been doing this since the 80s. They've been doing it for a long time, but they might retire from the community at some point. Gen 2 are often people of a similar demographic to me in their 20s and 30s who have a lot of time for their hobbies because they're not that senior in their careers yet and they haven't started families yet. But as more and more Gen 2 designers get to that point, they might end up getting distracted from the hobby and not having the time to design games. By that point, it will be a case of, do we have enough Gen 3 designers to keep the hobby going if we lose a lot of our Gen 1 and Gen 2 designers? And do they have the knowledge they need to keep it going? Another factor that might prevent growth is something I like to think of as the one game phenomenon. This is where people join the hobby. They get excited, they come up with the idea for a game. It's something that they're really passionate about. And that gets them through all the hard bits, cutting out counters and replying to endless emails. It gets them through all that because they care about it so much. And then their game runs successfully and people start saying, oh, that was really good. What's your next game? And then the designer thinks, oh, that was really hard. Oh, that was my favourite idea. That was the thing I cared about the most. And a lot of people don't go on to run a second game. Now, with enough new people, we will see the sustained growth to overcome that. But there's another thing that can help. The fact that a lot of games are repeatable. A lot of games are one-shots, but there are a lot that can be played over and over again. And I had to think about what games I think will still be around in 2030. In fact, I've got a bet with Tim as to whether either of these games will be played in 2030, so someone had better run them. The two games, and you can probably guess because they are very well-known games, are Watch the Skies and Den of Wolves. These are both very well-known games. There's a huge amount of brand recognition, and that is definitely something that will keep them going for the next 10 years. But it's more than that. It's easy for a community who's never run a game before to get access to these files and run them. They're beginner-friendly, not just for players, but also for game runners. But on top of that, these are also simple games that can be modified. There are countless Watch the Skies mods out there already. If John Maison gives permission for as well, I think we'll see spin-offs for Den of Wolves within a few years when people get used to the format and want to put their own flavour on it. This means that these are not just good gateways for designers, just good gateways for players and for game runners. They're also good gateways for designers to start designing, dipping their toe into designing games without the support of a very experienced community. So, where do I think we'll be in 2030? I think there'll be so many games out there we won't even be trying to count them. They'll be designed by tons of different people around the world. There'll be a 12-year-old who becomes the world's youngest ever Megagame designer. There'll be commercial games that are shorter and simpler and bringing more people into the game who wouldn't come along to the games in their current format. There'll be people from theatrical backgrounds who hire actors to interact with people as countries that are unplayed or to do sketches between turns. A VR person who works in VR will have designed a megagame that you play using your VR headset at home. The definition of megagames is going to be even broader, and the arguments about what constitutes a megagame are going to be just as fierce. But whatever happens to them, whatever they look like, I'll tell you one thing, I'll still be playing them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Becky. If we could have a round of applause in the general symposium chat for Becky, that would be fantastic.
Fantastic. Thank you, folks. Great. Well, thank you very much, Becky, for that. For really just pushing us to think into the future and for challenging us to think about what our future games are going to be. I notice a few people have jumped the gun, Kieran including, bless his heart. So I would now invite people, anyone that might have a question for Becky emerging out of her talk, to please post them in the questions for speaker chat now. And it's obviously fine now, but for the next three speakers, I would ask folks to please wait until the speaker has concluded before posting questions. I think it's important that we all pay our attention. But anyway, we've had a few. So let me just dive right in with Johan of Gothenburg Megagames. Question for Becky. How do you see the inevitable impact of the sharing economy on megagames in the future, or even the token economy?
I don't know what the token economy is.
I believe he's talking about the ubiquitousness of how we're handling our
economic systems within games. At the moment, we're using plastic tokens. Perhaps in the future, we won't be. I believe that's what Johan is asking about.
Oh, that's interesting. I think he's
Perhaps,
asking, so I'll just double check. And
yeah, let's move on to question 2, and we can swing back around to Johan once he's clarified. So, Pieface314 question: do you think that persistent megagames that take place over longer periods of time but require less immediate input will become more popular?
I think that's an interesting question. I think, like I mentioned, I think these types of mega games will become more accepted within the definition of what a mega game is. I think right now, if you were to run a mega game over a longer period of time, you would get a lot of people saying, "Oh, is it really a mega game?" So I think they'll become more common just because there will be more mega games. I don't think they'll necessarily become more common in terms of a higher proportion of mega games will do that. I think they will become more common in that there will be more of them around because there will be more mega games around. I think there are obvious appeals to how it works to it because it means that people who can't dedicate an entire day to it would be able to take place in them. But it also, that lends itself quite strongly to online. I think the only one I've actually heard of it that I like it are the ones that are being run by the Mega Game Coalition, like the Owl School one. So I think in-person mega games that work like that would be interesting. I mean, I guess if you had a strong enough, dedicated enough community in a small enough area, you could have them as in-person mega games as well. In short, I don't think they'll replace. I don't think they'll become a larger proportion of, maybe a slightly larger proportion of mega games as they currently are, as people see how people are doing them and copy ideas from them and take elements. But I think overall, the majority of mega games will probably still stay as more standalone events.
Sure. Okay, great. So Johan has clarified that he's referring to bitcoins specifically, talking about Bitcoin. So I guess how do you see the impact of bitcoins affecting mega games in the future?
So I'm also going to say that I don't really know how Bitcoin works either. So, but just in general, talking about how sort of the way that the world's economy changes will affect mega games, I guess. I think that's kind of where we're going with it. There will be games that want to model that. There will be games that see the way the world's economy is changing and want to model that. There will also be games that avoid it because it's difficult and people haven't really done that sort of thing before. I think increased technology is going to make those sort of more complicated economy structures in mega games easier. So if, for example, we have a mega game where everyone's amount of money in the game is tracked via an app that they've got on their phone, that would make more complicated transactions easier.
Economy is notoriously difficult to model in mega game, a challenge that we still need to overcome. But yes, apps perhaps as well will help with that. Next question from Dave Boundy. Online games will have higher profit margins than current ones. Will acceptability of online games increase and so make commercialization possible?
Yeah, I think acceptability of online games will increase. I think there are probably a lot of people we've only had a handful of online games so far. I don't know how long we're going to be socially distancing or staying at home for. The longer we do, I think the more of an impact online games will have on the hobby, and the more people will join the hobby and only know online games, or maybe have gone to one or two games before online games happened, and those people will automatically think more of the things that online games have when they think of what a mega game is. Will that make commercialization more possible? I think entirely. It's a lot easier to monetize something that has fewer overheads. So I think online games could be a good way for a good avenue for someone who was looking at how to commercialize mega games to go down. I think that's a good point.
Well, actually, Becky, if I might abuse my my moderator seat for a second, as a follow-up question to Dave's one, obviously the games which have been run online thus far, I believe, haven't, or most of them at least, haven't been monetized. When do you think monetization of online or digital mega games may become the norm?
Someone will just do it. Someone will do it. You know, I imagine when they first started doing in-person mega games, eventually they said, oh, actually, this hall fire is quite expensive. Does everyone mind chipping in? And, you know, eventually someone will just say, oh, actually, I've paid out for this Discord server. Do people mind chipping in? And then that might start at £5 or £10, and then that will just increase when people start. You know, I had a cool idea that you could send out. Back when I first started Megagame, you received your handbook through the post. That doesn't happen anymore generally, but you could send out a cool little like thing for people to, like a hat for people to wear when they're on webcam doing an online mega game or something that represents the team they're in, so people can see that when they go on webcam with someone. And if you introduce things like that have a physical cost with them, then I think it's going to be easier for you to start charging people, and it'll end up getting in that way.
Sure, absolutely. I think I suspect a contentious question coming in from Kieran here. Do you think the seemingly inevitable professionalization of games will result in the community losing what makes mega games special?
No, because I think there will always be the people who want to make those sort of in-depth, detailed, labour of love games. I don't think the community will lose it. I think that there will be more of the games that are more professionalised. We'll see more reruns of games. There'll be more games that everyone's played. And I think it's just a different sort of special, because I can count on one hand the number of mega games. I don't even think I can do that. I can't really think of any mega game that I've gone to that I don't have at least a couple of moments that felt amazing and that made an impact on my experience as a mega gamer. So I think mega games, the format is just very special. I think there will always be the games coming out that are just complete labours of love, and I don't think the community will ever lose that.
Absolutely. So for one final question, I think we have time for just one final question from Rebecca. With the growth you see happening, how do you think anyone will be able to compete in the market for players?
In a sense of, sorry, I'm not sure I understand this one either. In the sense,
I believe what she's referring to is perhaps the market might become oversaturated, perhaps, with games, and that we may lose that critical mass to make games functional. I believe is what she's referring to.
That's a good question. But, I do think it's the sort of thing that you do see sort of happening in communities, in a bit of a ebb and flow sort of cycle, in that you get a lot of new people in. Only one or two of them want to design games, and some of them drop away, and then you get a lot of designers who want to, like the really keen ones, all stay. They all want to design games. You've got a bit of a player dearth, and you maybe have some games that don't quite fill. I think the way to combat that is to really lean hard into this diversification of the player base. If you can't fill your games by marketing them on Facebook to the existing audience, reach out to all those other communities, things like theatre, things like... I said theatre and Model UN, there's just the two examples, LARP communities, and just looking for other ways to advertise to players that haven't already heard about mega games. I think at the moment a lot of games, especially ones in an area that's got a high existing player base, just rely on the fact that they will be able to fill their games, and it's easy for them to market. They can just stick it up and it will fill. Whereas the games in areas where there isn't that strong a player base, and I think it would be an interesting challenge for a designer to decide they're not going to market their game to the existing mega game community for the first month of promoting their game. They're going to market to a completely new community to see if they can get people in, and then that's not so much if you already were you fill your game, but if you're in an area where you've already got a lot of people coming along to your game.
Absolutely, and I think that point about diversifying the market base, so the player base, is an excellent place to end our discussion with Becky Ladley. Apologies to people who posted additional questions. Perhaps you can discuss these later with Becky in the pub. But perhaps we could just have one more round of applause in the comments section for our speaker, Becky Ladley. Thank you very much, Becky, once again.
Thanks everyone for listening.